Welcome back to Human Powered. I'm Jen Rubin, and I'm here with Jessica Becker. And today we're going to be talking with Jim Winship, who is a social worker, a retired college professor, a storyteller, and a documentary filmmaker. And it's that last part that it's why we want to talk to him. He received funding from Wisconsin Humanities to support this documentary project he's doing about rural Wisconsin. So that's the conversation we're about to have.
Yeah, Jen and I got to watch a few minutes of the initial piece that's coming out. He's hoping with more funding in a little over a year for community events around Wisconsin. And it's a really unique project, and we're pretty excited to share this with you. Well, Jim, it's so nice to be here with you this morning. Thanks for taking some time to talk with us. We are pretty excited to hear a little more about the most recent project that was funded by Wisconsin Humanities. And although you have a long relationship with Wisconsin Humanities, do you want to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background?
Sure. I'm Jim Winship. I live in Whitewater, Wisconsin, and I've lived here in Wisconsin since 1981. Originally from the South. Came up here to take a job teaching at University of Wisconsin-Whitewater, figuring I'd be here for a few years, and it turned out that one, Whitewater was not only a really good place to raise kids, but it also, over a period of time, Wisconsin has become home. I describe myself as being a proud husband and parent, a social worker, retired college professor, um, storyteller, and documentary filmmaker.
You were also part of the Wisconsin Humanities Speakers Bureau for a little while, or maybe it was actually for quite a while. The Speakers Bureau was one of our most popular programs in that Wisconsin Humanities um, sent folks like yourself who had stories to share from their expertise in the humanities disciplines out to libraries and communities all over the state. You had two, I believe, talks that you did. What were they about?
Yeah, let me just focus on one because in getting ready for talking with the two of you, I realized um, that what I did with Wisconsin Humanities Council was the first time in which I had put those two parts of myself together, the part that's a storyteller and the part that's a social worker slash college professor. In that, and I'll do just a little bit of background, is I think in the late 1980s, I realized that I like telling stories. I had originally done that when I was directing a summer camp and telling ghost stories at night, and thought this was something that I wanted to do. I like the idea of performing, and I do not play any instruments well, and I have a terrible singing voice. Um, and so um, I started locally and then ended up telling stories for money at schools and libraries and then in other kinds of venues. And then when I had started working a little bit with parents, and then that led to working with parents at a homeless shelter, and then realizing I wanted to tell those stories. And so I had applied for and got a Wisconsin Humanities Council grant, one of their small grants, to put together a program in which I combined research that a professor at UW at Oshkosh had done and so I think he had done this research in the early 1980s, where his students interviewed older folks in nursing homes and other facilities with their experience during the Great Depression. So I combined those stories, which were just fascinating, with the experiences of families I'd worked with. And so in that part, I would take the person's voice and kind of act that out and then step back and be the college professor kind of talking about it. And so I did that. And so, as you said, I was on the Speakers Bureau for a good while. And so I have no idea how many of those talks I gave, but I really enjoyed doing that. And so I did that a number of times around the state.
That's so cool. I'm glad we got a chance to sort of bring that up because the Speakers Bureau hasn't existed from Wisconsin Humanities in a while, but it really was an incredible resource there for a bit when, it was this way that communities all over the state, rural communities, smaller, less resourced communities could have folks like yourself come in with topics that weren't um, otherwise going to be discussed. And it was a really powerful program. So I'm glad we got a chance to sort of remember that and what you were up to. And it sounds like it kind of led into some of your current interests with the film that you've been working on with your son, right? Do you want to tell us more about that? That also received a Wisconsin Humanities grant.
Correct.
So Megan, who is the grants person at Wisconsin Humanities now, we when we're trying to think about who we want to talk to, we ask her like who recently got funding, like what's happening at Wisconsin Humanities. And so she was when she told us about yours, we're like, that sounds super interesting.
So I received funding, and really was the funding that got the project started for a documentary, Growing Older in Rural Wisconsin. We had originally titled it as Growing Older in a Rural Wisconsin County, thinking we were just going to do a like looking at a microcosm of aging and then trying to generalize from that, and then realize for a variety of reasons, including marketing, that growing older in rural Wisconsin was a better title and more. And as often is the case with documentaries, things change as you get started and as you're working with them. And so that was that. And so we have been working on that project really since 2023. So in terms of the actual filming, um, that started in 2024, and we filmed for about a year and a half. Um, and then we are going to do a little bit more filming at the end of the summer, because what we've done is we've talked with older Wisconsin residents, principally in Waushara County in the center of the state, Watoma and around there, um, in Bayfield County, and then in Washburn County. So we've got central and then the very northern part of the state. And we've been following some of those participants for close to 2 years, and there's some other people that we've only talked to once or twice. And then out of their stories is coming, a bigger story about what it's like to age in place in rural counties, which in many ways are under-resourced, to use a jargon term, but in other ways have lots of connections, um, both for the individuals and then also for the communities. And we have at this point over 80 hours of film. And and so what we're going to be doing, especially, we've started that a little bit, but especially in the fall, the goal is to turn this into a 52 to 55-minute documentary, and then starting in 2027 to look for distribution and also to show it in rural communities around the state. We've been in contact with a number of people that we've talked to, or communities that we know from an earlier project, about showing those. And the goal of the project was to show it in a community setting, and then afterwards to have a discussion about what can this county do to help oldsters, which is my favorite description of people my age, to help oldsters in their lives.
When I was watching the clip, the there's a lot of examples in there, but the one early on that stuck out to me, I think, is it the township of Bell, or is it Bell
Yes.
City?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think so there's like 345 people and 65% of them are oldsters, right? So just thinking about like what does that mean? How does a community what do you do when that's the situation, right? So I like how you put that in, at least in this clip early, because it really then had me thinking about that as I watched it.
One of the things about it's the town of Bell, it has its own post office, but within the larger town, with the larger, very small town, um, and they have a 24/7 community center. I've never heard of one of those before. So it never closes, and so it's available, and it's staffed for about 20 hours a week with someone who coordinates it. and we've talked to her several times about her life. She's an 81-year-old who actually retired at the end of last year.
Mm.
Figured it was time that she wanted to spend some more time for herself and felt like she was able to afford it at this point. Um, but there's a lot of mutual aid,
Yeah.
and that's how people get by.
Well, the other statistic that stood out, not just about the specifics of Bell, but also of the whole state, was that 1 in 5 people will be over age 65 within the next 2 decades, which is just not that long, right? So I guess that probably gets to why you were compelled to create this film and gather these stories and think about these issues. But what is it that really were you talking to someone whose story was so rich, or what is it that got you onto this project in the first place?
So there were several reasons. One was that this is the second documentary that my son and I have made. We made a documentary, What We're Hungry For, how food pantries fed rural Wisconsin during the pandemic. And we did that we finished in 22. And started it during the pandemic. And as we were finishing that up, I was starting to think about another project because I really enjoyed doing what we're hungry for. And Marty Lee, who is one of the people who is featured in the food pantry documentary, she was directing a food pantry in Washira County at the point, and she was saying, "Jim, I'm not leaving here. This is where I live. I want to age in place." And that made me start thinking about that. And then the other two parts is one is the I wanted to continue with rural America. I'd been, I've lived in small towns and small cities and rural areas for much of my life. I was very involved with a rural social work network a lot earlier in my professional career, still somewhat am, and rural stories aren't told enough. And the other thing is that it's also my story. I'm going to be 78 in 3 weeks. Uh, um, Looking forward to that birthday. And so the story about aging in small towns and rural America is a story that's my story. And so I thought this would be something worthwhile. And then I think it was Wisconsin Humanity Council's support that really launched the project.
Yeah, I like the idea of it so much, this idea that no matter where you're from, there's just a lot of people are like, this is where I'm from. Yes, maybe my children have left and there's grandkids or whatever, and they want me to come move there, but like, this is where I'm from, this is where my
Yeah.
community is, this is what I know. And so how can a community support you and who anyone else in the staying? So I love the idea about, the idea of it. And I'm wondering, so you said that for some people, you followed them for a year and a half?
Yes.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a lot of time following people. Is there a particular person you followed that stood out, or what was it like to spend that kind of time with people over that
Well,
period of time?
yeah. So I think in terms of the people that we've followed, and so um, really part of this is life itself. So there were one couple and then two other individuals in Washira County, because that's where we started. Those that we've talked to longer. We've also talked to people in Bayfield County a couple of times, and we'll be up there again. So the ones in Washira County will probably be over 2 years by the time we finished. And so one of those is the Stratton family that you see on the documentary. They're 77 and 78 now, high school sweethearts. And they've had that farm for a very long time. And Marty Lee. And the other person, Delos Gates, who unfortunately was killed earlier this year. 21-year-old came over the top of a hill driving in the wrong lane and hit him. And so Dulles is no longer with us. But yes, so we often in documentary filmmaking they talk about people in documentaries as subjects, and we talk about people as participants. So these are people who have chosen to talk with us and to share their lives, and it's a mutual arrangement. Nothing will, we will run everything that's going to be in the documentary past the
Yeah.
people before it gets shown, and just to make sure that the story we're telling is indeed some version of their story. There's never just one version of a story, but that it's a version of their story that they're comfortable with sharing. And so that's been really good because one of the things is, and we found this with a food pantry film, is that you get to know people. Several of the people from the food pantry documentary have become friends.
And what do you think would be, you said you hope to show the film in communities and rural communities and that creates an opportunity for conversation. What is your biggest hope for the film and how do you see it really having an impact?
Well, uh, uh, let me start with the community showings, and then we'll talk about beyond that. One of the advantages, so we did that with the food pantry documentary. We showed that I think in 11 settings around the state. And the advantage of showing something, and that one's about 42 minutes, is that everybody then has so you get a group of people in there, and I think it was the largest we had was like 125 or 150, somewhere as small as in the low 20s, a lot of them around 30 or 40 people. Um, and so everybody has that common experience of seeing the documentary. And they also have the common experience of living in that community. So people know that community. And so then to be able to ask those questions, well, what can we do in the food pantry documentary? What can we do about hunger and food insecurity? In this one, and what we're doing now, because we're in the process of um, submitting a grant application that I think will um, that if that comes through, will give us the resources we need to finish the post-production and the editing. But so we're gathering support for people who are agreeing to show it in their communities and asking the question, what would you like the documentary to do? What would you like the showing to do? Because I think it can vary from community to community. But I think the main thing is that after seeing what this is an experience of older rural folks. And what can we do that would support them, make it easier for them to stay there? Jen had mentioned earlier about often um, often children saying, "Why don't you come and live with us? Why don't you move? Or why don't you move to some place where you'll be safer?"
Right.
Because one of the conflicts, I think, between older folks and their children is children are often really concerned about safety and security. What happens if mom falls, right? And the parents may be more focused on their own life and quality of life and familiarity. And so there's a conflict. And so one of the questions is what can be done to help to support people as they age in place?
Yeah. You know, um, one of the reasons, so after Doge, eliminated funding at Wisconsin Humanities, one of the reasons why Jessica and I were interested in taking this podcast into having these conversations is to talk to people who are doing sort of humanity, using the tools of the humanities, whether it's history or storytelling or, music or culture, and using that in a civically engaged way in their communities, right? So I feel like this is just a really good example of, you're doing these interviews, you're gathering these histories, you're turning it into a documentary, but it's not then, and now we'll just let send the documentary out into the world and see what happens. It's like you're then bringing together communities to to deepen a conversation.
Yeah, it's really great. And you are re getting interest from communities that want to screen the film.
Yes, I think we've got, and I'm still I'm going to be talking to people on the phone And mostly just reaching out to people that we've talked to one way or another because I've been to
Mhm.
conferences and other kinds of, but I think there's 8 communities so far we've gotten,
That's great.
and then I'd like to have, because what we say in the grant, we want to show it in at least 15 communities, and so there will be a few more by the time we submit that grant, which is in a little bit more than 2 weeks.
Well, good luck with the funding. Clearly a really valuable tool for starting community conversation, but also it must be really valuable to the kind of people who see themselves in the story, where they're not otherwise sort of seeing themselves and their issues represented.
So one of the things that's interesting, and so Marty Lee, so Marty is 69, I think. Um, one of the younger people
Yeah, I
who's
was gonna say that's not so old.
yeah,
So,
one of the younger people who shows up in the documentary. Um, but one thing Marty said was that she thinks one of the advantages of that is um, that you will see people who are receiving services of some kind, meal programs, other kinds of connections. And some of the people who are watching the documentary who are also older might think, oh, this is something I could do. So I think that's one of the probably, perhaps that might be an ancillary uh, impact of showing the doc in the communities. It just makes me think about things and what have I learned about growing older, in doing this. And I think one of the things about people getting older is there is a dominant narrative, um, that there's two dominant narratives. And one is that life as you get older is just increasing decrepitude. Um, in that, people just get older and sicker um, and just kind of fade away. Um, and then there's also the image of the super agers, the 93-year-olds that are running marathons. And I think that those are the two things that we see. And and what we've found is really neither of those. And part of the thing of making a documentary is that you talk to the people who want to talk with you. We were not able to. We originally thought that this would be more about isolation and loneliness, because that's certainly an issue with older adults. And not surprising, people who are lonely generally don't like to talk about that on camera. So, but of the people we have talked with, um, and they really kind of fit within a range of people who are at least getting by financially. Um, and none of those people we talked to were really, really well off. Um, but who also were trying to not only cope with the challenges in their life and the ways in which um, the rural setting in some ways is limiting, but also very much sustaining, but also just making meaning at this point in their life. Because I really believe, and I think this is also my story, is that um, there is a window for individuals at the point when one is no longer caring for young children, if one has children, and is not caring for older parents because the older parents are no longer with us, and one's health is good enough to where that's not a concern, and one has enough resources. And so people are making meaning in their life and wanted to kind of show that.
Yeah,
that's
that's
great.
really that isn't the most dramatically flashy, glamorous story, and yet it's probably the through line for what aging really looks like for this sort of demographic that is 1 in 5 people, right? Which is a common story that, as I think I was sort of thinking before as you were talking, like to see yourself represented there and to recognize that actually what you're doing is you're making meaning out of your life and that that is the definition of aging wisely, to sort of growing into wisdom and elderhood. And if we don't get to see that, even like young people or, middle, I'm still in that point where I'm raising kids and taking care of elders, right? But like if we don't get to see that stage very easily because we're all spread out and, you know, there's less visibility of that, we miss out on recognizing the beauty of that stage. So I'm really glad you just expressed that. Thanks a lot.
Right. Yeah, this it stuck up on me.
Yeah.
I don't think if I hadn't been doing this project, I don't think it would have been as clear to me, because it really just feels like I and many of the people we talk to are in this kind of privileged moment in which one can try to do what one can in the world,
Yeah.
and at the same time to just enjoy oneself. And we've got lots of footage, of people just of doing that, taking the time to get together with others. Some of those is in you find that in service projects, and some of it is just having fun.
Hmm.
Yeah, I sort of I appreciate that. I mean, when I like I've never made a documentary film, but when I think about storytelling and people telling a story, like that each story can do one thing. Like you could tell 10 stories about a thing, but each story does one thing, right? So I like how like you're just super clear on like what this documentary is trying to do.
Well, this has been really lovely. Thank you for spending your morning with us, Jim.
Oh, this has been great.
It is really nice to hear you talk about this project, and it's nice to reconnect with you. So thanks
It
for,
is. It
yeah.
is. This has been fun.
And thanks
Okay.
for the work that you're doing. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
Well, I hope you all enjoyed hearing a little more about this project. I really did. And I feel like we touched on a lot of things that I'll be thinking about for a while. There were a lot of ways that the stories Jim was telling relate to stuff that's going on in both of our lives.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a essential question, right? We're all, we all are hopefully going to get older. Most of us hopefully have parents who are getting older or who got older. And so these are, very live questions for all of us. And I really appreciated hearing about how they're going about this documentary, what they're trying to do with this documentary. And yeah, I enjoyed learning more about it.
Yeah, it's good to also imagine the impact that it really could have, and how these tools like storytelling and filmmaking and sort of oral history gathering have a place in our state and our civic landscape. I really appreciate Jim's work.
Yeah. So we're gonna have in the notes his website, and so you can watch a clip that they've put together from some of these interviews and just sort of learn more about the project.
Thanks for being here, and thanks to Chrissy Widmeyer for audio editing. And we'll be back with another conversation. Thanks for tuning in.